All right, so good morning, everybody. I'm Keith Mathis, and so welcome today. We're going to be talking about tailoring your project plans, how customization leads to success. Now, many of you who've been running projects for a long time probably recall that this has actually kind of been a little bit of a battleground in people understanding and starting to be trained in project management. And one of the reasons for that is because what has happened is that when we had PMBOK that was so thick and process driven, people would teach PMBOK, and of course, people would all of a sudden decide, well, I've got to use everything that PMBOK says, and so I've got to use every process, and that's there. And so you would have a monster-sized project plan for maybe a little bitty project. And even when we trained project management through the years, you'd see people who would walk away with that mistake because you would train in all the different processes, but the undercurrent was you didn't have to use all of those if you didn't need it for your project. But then you saw some folks who felt like, no, PMBOK says it, we've got to do it 100%. So today I wanted to talk about this. The shift has actually taken place, as you know already, with PMI rolling out PMBOK 7, that they shifted from a process view over to a system view. And so if you've looked at PMBOK 7, you know that it's half the size of PMBOK 6, which was your last process-driven PMBOK. And they've got PMBOK 7 now, and of course 8 will be coming out shortly. But the emphasis is that they talk about tailoring, customization of your plan. And this has been a good piece of emphasis. And of course, it's even carried all the way over onto the PMP test because they talk about customization and tailoring on the PMP test now. But the point behind that was it caused us to be able to start shifting with our mindset from thinking that I've got to use every process that's there just because it's there to where I realize, okay, you know what? I can customize this. If this is a project we've done 15 times, it's not high risk. Even if it is risk, we can do our workarounds on this. It's not a big deal because we've done it 15 times and we only need this amount of structure or rigor. Many times people are starting to realize, hey, I can do that and run the project faster rather than all the documentation and all these other pieces. So that's kind of the background that has brought us to this. And I just thought it'd be a good topic for us to talk about, especially since PMBOK 7 has gone to the system view rather than a process view. So let's talk about the importance of customized project plans. Now, when I talk about customized project plans, I'm not splitting the hair between project documents or business documents. I'm just calling them project plans, documents, customizing anything associated with the project, even though I know technically there's some business documents and then there's project plan. And so I'm going to talk about customizing anything is really what I'm emphasizing here, okay? All right, so let's start off with the diagnostic phase. All right, so assessing organization and project context. So you conduct interviews with stakeholders, evaluate the project types, map current project practices, use a gap analysis. And so all of this might be very common to you. Some of this might be brand new to you, but the system view is going in the direction of a little bit more analysis than maybe what has been done before. Now, you maybe have been doing this all the time, but many folks have interviewed the customer and come up with what the statement of work is and then create the WBS, which is nothing wrong with that. But sometimes we have created a project or created a solution that possibly did not work or did not work as well as we thought it would work. And so what the emphasis needing to be today is making sure that the solution we're providing for that customer is not just the solution they want, but the solution that's going to work. It's going to do what they want it to do. And so that's what you're trying to do is look for the analysis of and evidence of that the solution we're using is absolutely going to work the way the customer wants it. So there's an importance of the customization of those plans, though. So you're aligning with strategic objectives. So I started with that bullet point because that's absolutely one of the biggest drivers and shifts that we have seen in the last probably 5 years with PMI. PMI has always alluded to that the need for a project should be driving a strategic goal or objective, but they have really gotten strong with it. It's moved over into the PMP test now, and it's so important for us to understand that we shouldn't just be running a project because we have extra money or just because somebody has some kind of flair for a particular thing they want. It should be driving some type of strategic goal, some type of objective, all the way up of that strategic plan for that organization. It's fit for the project context. You avoid waste and effort because we're doing just enough to reach those needs and to meet those requirements, but we're not doing all this add-on stuff that nobody's asking for. Relevant performance metrics are measured, and you use just enough processes, methodologies, and tools to be successful. So the goal here is you're building value for the customer in a couple of ways by building speed, but also with less structure. And so you purposely are making sure that you do not have all this unwanted structure in your project and sign-offs in your project that nobody needs. There's no need for it for that type of project. Now, there are projects that need some of that stuff. If you're working a regulatory project, you know what I'm talking about. You do have structure and rigor because of legalities and because of all of those types of things. But many of us work on projects that, boy, there's no legality really to it. It just needs to be done and done quickly and cheaply. And so we're trying desperately to do that, okay? All right, so let's look at the next piece here. So alignment with strategic objectives, strategic goals. Now, the connection here that might throw us off so many times is that if we're working down here with the worker bees, sometimes the projects we're working on just come down the pipeline and we're just told what we're supposed to do. We're told the project, we're told the due date, we might even be told the budget and everything else about it. We might not have a good, clear view of how that project is absolutely working with that strategic plan. So this would be a piece for the executives at the C-suite to open up and start sharing more and more of how this project interconnects. And we're starting to see that better, I think, with communication and with people being able to share some of these to be able to let people know and understand what the importance is of that. So it has to be something very, very communicated so that people understand how that is. And what that does to bring it full circle so we understand how that connects to tailoring is it allows you to see how much rigor it needs. Some projects are going to need more rigor, some are not going to need as much. And so you're wanting to be able to connect with the project, with the executives and the C-suite with this. So alignment with strategic objectives. So tailor organizational goals that contribute directly to the organization's mission, vision, strategic priorities. Support business value. Refuse to do anything that does not bring value. And increase executive buy-in to justify leadership decisions. So the components that we have here talking about strategic objectives is very important, mainly because you're doing enough to bring value, you're doing enough to satisfy the requirements, and you're doing enough for executives to be supportive of this because it's going to be as cheap as it possibly can be and as fast as it possibly can be, so everybody's going to be on board. Many times you get caught in those projects that just seem to be like it's eating liver. If you've ever been in that situation, they just keep growing and growing. And it seems like this sucker is never going to get done. And that's the opposite of what you're looking at here. And sometimes it could be because we've structured it wrong and we've required some type of rigor for something that doesn't really need to be there. The next piece I want us to look at is size and complexity. Fit the project context. Size and complexity. Now, some of you are working at some monster-sized companies. I know because you've been nice enough to bring me in over the last 30 plus years. And so you might need more rigor. You're justifying it to more people, more layers, okay? We get it. And so yours, it's just the nature of the beast. You're having to have more rigor than others. But some of you are working in very small teams. Some of you might even be doing more agile than you are doing traditional project management. And so you have the flexibility of communicating your people. They're right there with you. They literally are down the hall. I mean, you're not having to track anybody down. So the size and complexity of what you're doing can make a huge difference as well. So small projects do not need the same depth of documentation as large and multi-year type of projects, unless there's something separate about that. If you're like, I go back to regulatory, you have to do what you have to do on those. But the typical project probably does not need that. Industry or regulatory alignment, healthcare, construction, IT, government, those are going to be their own breed in some cases. You got to check the box because you got to check the box. But project type and environments such as remote or hybrid or co-located teams, some folks are using those, but you're not seeing as many co-located teams since COVID as you might think. Because what you're seeing is that we've got a skeleton crew of people working in our organization, and that skeleton crew typically is running multiple projects. And so what's happening is you're not seeing as many co-located teams working on just one project. Doesn't seem to be happening. Maybe your world is different than mine, but that seems to be what we're picking up on. All right, so as we start looking at tailoring too, you're trying to avoid waste and effort. Now, we're not talking about just money, even though money obviously is going to be a piece of it. We're talking about time and effort to get something done, to be able to move the project along. So what will this data tell us that we do not know already with other metrics? So for an example, we've come out with a lot of different metrics over the last several years. And some of these metrics are spot on. We want them. We need them because it's showing us a blind spot that we had in previous projects. But some metrics is just another way to calculate something that we were already calculating. And so what benefit is it for us to calculate that we're under budget or over budget three different ways? If one of those is telling us, that's just sucking down additional time and effort. And so in other words, pick which one makes the most sense for you, for your industry, for your company. And you don't have to spend your time showing people three ways that we're under budget, and show the one. 80-20 rule is something that will help us. So 80% of the information without spending the time to gain every single metric, because there's a ton of metrics in project management that are going to tell you the same thing that you already have. Now, if there's a gap and you don't know, yeah, you're going to run another metric maybe to verify something. Sure, that's good. That's good project management. Can data come from the metrics already being collected? In many cases, they can. Now, those of you who are running some of your Scrum and Agile projects, some of that is still evolving. Some of those metrics are still evolving. And then conduct an audit review to verify that the correct metrics are collected and analyze. And this would be a role that PMO could have in trying to tailor some of these processes as well. In other words, what metrics do we need for traditional might not be the same as what we're using in Agile, even though PMI in 7th edition and even on the PMP test are looking at ways to be able to calculate cost performance index and schedule performance index and use earned value over on the Agile side. And I see what they're doing. They're doing it per iteration, and there's not anything wrong with that. But there might be some better calculations for you than even what we're using or thinking about with using earned value over there than what's being talked about right there. The other piece would be relevant performance metrics. What makes sense? What makes sense to our people? Now, many of you have heard me speak since COVID, and you heard me say that one of the things I thought was interesting, and some of you said that I think my company did this. So let me tell the story. So during COVID, many people were working from home. Many organizations were not sure how to track their performance. And so to me, I would think I would track their deliverables. I would track what they're producing. But anyway, over those years, I heard people saying, well, my company's tracking when the last time was I wiggled my mouse. And I don't know about you, but that makes no sense to me. So wiggling your mouse does not produce productivity or value. And so what kind of metric? And so once again, tailoring the metrics to where it fits your organization and fits your industry might be something that will take you to that next level in project management. So what metrics make sense for your projects? What is not being measured currently that could help? Does the metric influence behavior or decisions? That's the real piece, because a metric that just says I wiggled my mouse doesn't really prove anything about productivity for that person. So what good is that metric other than this time you wiggled your mouse within 3 minutes and this time you wiggled your mouse within 6. And so where were you for 40 minutes? You didn't wiggle your mouse. Well, I don't really care about the mouse. I care about the project. You care about the project. I know, I hear about it. You care about the deliverable. You care about those things. So what good is that type of metric for what you're really measuring? And how hard is it to collect and analyze the metrics? Sometimes it gets very difficult to analyze the metrics because we're not collecting the right type of data. Now, down the road here with artificial intelligence coming in and we're getting it on your side of the firewall, some of this will be almost common because AI will actually pull some of the data and analyze it for us and give us recommendations automatically. So that is not that far down the road for many of us in these areas. So that's going to tailor some of that for you to where you're looking at what's going to bring the most value to you. So just enough processes, methodologies, and tools. So using just enough processes, methodologies, and tools means applying the minimum necessary structure, rigor, resources required to deliver the project successfully without overloading the team with unnecessary bureaucracy or under controlling the project. And so I love this phrase, and the reason I do is because it makes the most sense for what we're trying to do. How many times have you heard or thought yourself, I could get the project done if I wasn't attending all these sync-in meetings and if I wasn't having to fill out all this paperwork. And some of that paperwork might not make sense, and some of it I'm sure does make sense and has to happen in your industry. But sometimes we inundate people with that bureaucracy. We've got 15 sign-offs. Would 5 sign-offs not be as good as 15 in some cases? But nobody asked that question. So that's why you're coming back to what's just enough bureaucracy, what's just enough methodology, what's just enough of the amount of tools that I need to use for this that's going to give me the same level of value, same level of quality we currently have without having 15 people sign off on it. Now, some of you are going to send me an email and say, well, we need 15. Okay, if you're doing drug research and you're doing the drug projects and you're some of our clients that do that, I got it. You're being mandated by law to do some of this. But I'm talking about we're running a little bitty project and doing 15 sign-offs. That doesn't make sense with the timing. And then we're running behind on so many things. So something to just look at for you. Also, it's about finding the sweet spot. And there is a balancing spot, and there is no one size fits all. And I want to make sure that's clear. So as I'm saying these things, please don't think I'm trying to attack your industry or attack the way you're doing projects. Some of your projects might be spot on in balancing that. But what I'm trying to say is look and see, does it make sense? Are we wasting time with stuff that's not really being productive and doesn't bring value? And so the project, if it's well controlled, transparent, stakeholders' needs are being met, teams are not bogged down with this excessive documentation, unnecessary steps, overly complex tools, all of those types of things waste time and extend the project, cost money, and typically don't bring a lot of extra value. So one of the things I think that we're needing to do in the project world, and many of you that are in the PMO, you're doing such a good job starting to look at these areas, is looking to see, does it make sense the way we run projects and the stuff we're measuring, does it make sense for our projects? And does it make sense? Maybe there's a level of projects. So a level 1 project might be a project that's pretty small. You're not having to track but a handful of metrics. You don't have a handful of sign-offs going on with this thing. A level 3 might have all the rigor we're talking about. The challenge we get into is that a lot of times the organizational rules, everything's being treated like a 3 with 15 sign-offs and not a level 1. And you might need to create some type of leveling system for that. Let's move in a little bit further and talk about specific project-specific factors that require the customization. Now, as we do this, one of the things I want you to understand is that you can customize any area of the project. So I'm not saying just the methodology, even though that's usually a big piece. So for an example, team capability. Is the team experienced with agile, traditional, and hybrid? Because many of you are running some component probably of all three. A lot of times people will say, well, no, we're a waterfall shop. But when you start looking at some of the things they're doing because of a little bit of the customization, you're probably a little bit more hybrid than you are true waterfall. So now if I'm building a construction and building a house, I might be waterfall for that part, but am I using other methodologies to be able to help do the other components of that construction, other pieces of it? And so that might be. Customization may involve the training component. So how trained up are your people? Now, some of you are saying, Mathis, you're a trainer. That's why you're talking about training. Whether you use me or not, whether you train them or not, that'll be fine. But your people still need to have some training on waterfall, agile, and hybrid, because that's really what you're going to be doing. Some of your projects are going to be moving a little bit more from agile or waterfall to a hybrid setting because you're customizing those pieces. Technology. What technology and tools are your people using? Maybe you're using a tool that really is geared for waterfall, but you're getting ready to use hybrid and you're getting ready to do some agile projects. So do your people need some a training in Jira or some of the other type of software that's out there to be able to run those projects and allow it to be acceptable within your structure there? So that might make a difference. The other piece is going to be knowledge transfer. We've got to get away from trying to hold that knowledge so close that we're scared to death to share it with somebody else. In our companies, the way the ability to be able to customize and the ability to be able to get our people to go as fast as possible on a project and make good decisions, not just doing it, but making good decisions, is going to be knowledge transfer. And that's going to be training like we talked about, but that's going to be us giving knowledge to our people from ourselves and from each other. I'm not afraid you're going to get my job because I share with you how to do it or show you how to do it. So you consider whether or not the processes for knowledge transfer too, when we finish a project off to the customer, are working the way we want it. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it feels like a dump and run kind of thing as we do that. So let's look at selecting processes. So which processes must be left untouched? And so we have to start with that. Many of you have some situations, and so you have some regulatory situations and legal situations that process has to have 5 signatures, okay? And so let's just use that as an example. So that process has to have 5 signatures because it deals with legal and regulatory stuff. It doesn't matter what you think. It doesn't matter what your vote is. That has to have those 5 signatures. That's fine. Leave it alone. That one has to be there. But then you start looking at which processes need enhancement to make it better, which processes should be scaled down, which ones need more process and rigor, which ones need less. You probably still have some in that particular project or in any project that you need more rigor or less rigor that will help your project run faster. Don't mess with those that need the 5 because of legal and regulatory, that need those 5 signatures, and that everybody has to legal has already approved those particular things. Sure, that makes sense. But what part of that project can we go with less rigor? What part of that project needs more rigor maybe than what we're doing? That's what you're looking at with this piece. Then drivers for tailoring. So there's several things that we can look at and think about with tailoring. So first off, what's the size of your project? A big project might need more tailoring than a little. It might not be. So you're calling the shot. So you think, well, man, if we're calling the shot on every project on what we're doing here, then how does that work? Well, it works because you're customizing every project. Because guess what? Most of our projects have and need that customization in to some point. And then you're looking at strategic importance. Now, this might still be part of the strategic goals and objectives, but it might be far down. It might be more into the department level, or might be in just one agency's level. So that might make it more of a secondary project. So it's not as high a priority as some of the others. Regulatory or compliance needs. If you don't have any regulatory or compliance needs there, other than that you want it to deliver a high quality product to the customer with high value to the customer, meeting their objectives, then you've got some flexibility that some of the folks on this call don't. Some of you that are working in those regulatory, some of you are power plant people, and some of you are pharmaceutical people that are on here. And so I get it. You've got regulatory pieces. And then what's the level of risk of this? Have we done this type of project a gazillion times? Or is this the first time we've ever done it? And then what's the level of flexibility that we need? Do we need flexibility because requirements are still coming in? Do we need flexibility because we're going through a transition here and we're making changes? All of you work in those type of projects, I know, and you know what I'm talking about. You need the flexibility without having to pay a gazillion dollars to a vendor every time you have a change order. And so you need some of those flexibilities, which will dictate some of that methodology as well. So drivers for tailoring is going to be there. And the thing is, what's going to happen in the next 18 months as you start bringing in more artificial intelligence, and you're looking at how to be able to make it work within your organization. Because as you do this, you're going to be looking at all of these different components of how to work it. And there is no one size fits all in every one of these situations. So let's look at adjusting the methodologies to fit the project size and the scope of the work. So let's start off with ideas, processes, outcomes, challenges, regulations. So that would be a good first thought with a project. And so you've got ideas of what you're wanting to do, probably new products, new outputs from that project. But one of the things you're going to look at is some of the challenges. And so nothing wrong with that. That's going to feed into some of your risk, some of the issues down the road, but you're looking at regulations. So that regulation is going to dictate a certain level of rigor no matter what you do. And so you do that. That's okay. That regulation is going to have to be there. You have to have this level of rigor, and then you can build on how much more, or do we need any more than that? The other thing that you're going to be looking at then is looking at criteria for the project management methodology. So in other words, do I have to run the project management methodology exactly the way that PMBOK has, or that some other book has, or something like that? And so you're deciding how to run that, what's going to bring value to that project, what steps need to happen. And the other piece that you're going to be looking at then is to deliver it to that customer. Now, one of the things that you want to be able to do is to be able to get feedback from that customer coming back, which is going to dictate, was the rigor the right amount? And so in some cases, the feedback comes back and you think, wow, we cut too much. We didn't put enough rigor in there. And in many cases, the feedback comes back and you find out, you know what, there's plenty of rigor there. And when we're spot on with this. However, this situation could be different in the very next project as you're running it through. You're still talking about these same things, but the amount of flexibility and the amount of rigor might shift because of the type of project. So let's talk about the definition of rigor. Those of you who had your PMP, and most of you on here do, you know what I'm talking about, that rigor is one of the things that PMI talks about. It's an actual term throughout PMBOK for the last 25 years. So in project management, rigor is the degree of discipline, structure, and formality applied to the planning, executing, monitoring, controlling of a project. It reflects how strictly processes, documentation, governance, and approvals are enforced to ensure accountability, consistency, and compliance. So when we talk about rigor and shifting rigor, we're not talking about cutting quality. Don't mistake that. We're not talking about slinging something out to the customer that they don't like. We're not talking about slinging out a bad product. I'm not talking about those pieces. I'm talking about you're doing the most important things in that project, but are there things that don't bring value? That's what you're looking at with some of that. So high rigor would be heavy documentation, strict processes, multiple approval gates, detailed reporting, all the stuff that we've been exposed to over the years. We know what we're talking about there. High rigor, you have to do that. Regulatory projects would fit this in many cases. Low rigor would be the lightweight documentation, flexible processes, minimal approvals, and then adaptive reporting. And so this is going to fit many of our projects too. It's not just based on a style, even though many of you who are doing Agile or Scrum probably are doing those low rigor projects like that, and because of speed and because there's less documentation. We're talking rather than writing it down. But you might need predictive or plan-driven projects such as waterfall for some low rigor situations to where we can cut some of this documentation out. In other words, do I have to have this piece of documentation for every project regardless of size? Some maybe you do, some maybe you don't. Too much rigor for projects. Tailoring in project management means adapting methods, processes, and tools to fit the unique characteristics of that one project. So if you apply too much rigor, the team's wasting time filling out templates and chasing approvals. And I don't want to ask you because we talk about it. I've heard it in class. How many times have people talked about, man, I'm filling out all this stupid paperwork? And not that all paperwork is not needed, but some paperwork you just feel like, man, this is similar. This got the same information the other form had. And yet you feel like you're reproducing some of this stuff over and over again. So too much rigor. Too little rigor, if you apply too little, you risk chaos. You risk a project that's just all over the place. So missed requirements, accountability issues, you've got all of these types of things if I don't have enough rigor. So just enough tailoring balances those two extremes. Now, what some project management offices have chosen to do is to set the amount of rigor for every project across the board, and they've done that as a control mechanism. And I get that. I understand why they've done that, and they feel more comfortable that these particular things are happening. But at the same time, if projects are continuing to run over, either over budget or behind schedule, and we're not getting that product out the door as fast as we keep thinking that we should, is it possible that our methodology has too much rigor in it, or for some of our projects? Maybe not all, but for some of them. And that's just something for us to have to look at. We want to do just enough to get it out the door and to be able to maintain that level of quality. So some questions about rigor and trying to and bringing you back to whether or not we need to customize this. Does the team have the capacity to manage a high rigor project? Will the high rigor project experience bottlenecks because of the methodology? Does executive demand formal approvals on certain things? Now, those are going to be right in many cases, but is it overkill in some of the projects that we're working on? Will delays be common because of extra meetings, excessive documentation, or high risk? Now, the average project manager in most surveys, if you've looked at any of them, you'll be shocked at how many times they feel like they're going to meetings, being met to death, going to meetings. And what's happening is they're meeting and meeting and meeting, and many times they don't feel like there's any value in that meeting. So I'm not saying don't have meetings, okay? So I'm just saying that make the meeting count. If we're going to have a meeting, do I have to have a meeting as often as what we have right now? And what are we talking about? How much content are we putting into that meeting so that people are walking away with something? All right, so how much rigor does this project need? So let's bring it down and kind of do a deep dive with this. So principles of adjusting methodologies. Now, PMOs a lot of times struggle with this, and so all I'm trying to do is give you some talking points and some considerations here. But challenge with the mindset of one size fits all. The problem we've had with the PMBOK mindset, and PMBOK has been a phenomenal document since the 60s when they came out with a very thin PMBOK and all the way up to PMBOK 6, which was process driven, and it was almost 800 pages, if I recall. And so as we've used PMBOK, it's been a great document. But I think the problem that has happened with this is that we've looked at it and we've thought that these processes all look great, and we've kind of brought them in to mandate that. So challenge with the mindset of one size fits all, which fights inflexible environments. Now, and as you've noticed, that our environment in our workplace has gotten more and more inflexible. We need more flexibility, and so rather than making it inflexible, we need versatility, and that's what this is fitting for. So influencing the culture for change with the project, the methodology, the decision making. So one size fits all is being shifted over to where we're tailoring the methodology. What makes sense for this project? Now, that's going to be a culture shift on your side, and culture is going to create conflict on your side. Okay, so we already know that change creates conflict, and of course, PMI says you're the conflict manager as well. So the point is that this is not an easy thing we're talking about, even though we can agree with it, because once again, how much we shift it and who's making the call on that is going to be a huge deal. Knowledge, skills, gaps in methodology are moving from single projects to enterprise level projects. Once again, what's being produced should be bringing value to the organization and should be driving those strategic plans. But once again, is how much communication is coming from the executive level down to the front level. Bits and pieces are, sure, but how much is really coming down? Requirements for specific tools can hurt this step because we're having to use this tool. For an example, you're running agile projects, but you can't use anything. You can't use any of the agile software because the only approved software is something that we run waterfall with. So would just that discussion change the dynamics and the speed of what you're doing? Maybe. I'm just trying to give you some talking points here. Also, scale the governance and methodology through right-sized oversight. How much oversight do we need for this project? And so that oversight could be from the PMO, but it could be also from coaches, an agile coach that's working with your people, matching the tools to the size with the software and task boards. Always focus on delivering outcomes regardless of the adjustments. And communication can be adjusted for large projects compared to small ones. The reason why so many people are shifting to that agile Scrum environment or that hybrid environment that has that, they like the idea that we're seeing each other face to face, even if it's through through virtual, that we can talk about it and we can communicate, and we don't have to have 50 pages of documentation per meeting that everybody's trying to read. And that's why people are doing this. We're making a decision, we're talking it out faster. The thing on traditional that we like is we like the formality. We like the documentation. In case something goes wrong, we've got documentation. So there's a winner on both sides of these, and we're not saying get rid of one or the other. We're saying there are times when we have to soften it for that particular project. So let's talk about customizing project tools and communication strategies. Defining project tools. Scaling project tools means the ability of a project management tool to expand in capability, capacity, and complexity as the size, scope, and number of projects grow without sacrificing usability, efficiency, or performance. So we started teaching people on some of the tools. And here's the thing, there's typically going to be a couple of different tools you'll probably use. You might use certain tools over on the side of a plan-driven project, a waterfall type project, different than what you're using on Agile and Scrum or a hybrid project. You might use a totally different tool. So the goal here is not to teach you a tool or to say something about a tool. The goal here is what tool should you be using, and your people are seeing this and being exposed to this, and a little bit of research would make the difference. But are your people comfortable with a couple of different tools? It is the process of moving from a tool that works well for small teams or single projects to one that can also support enterprise-wide portfolios, multiple methodologies, and diverse stakeholder needs. Now, that phrase multiple methodologies is not put there by accident. You will become a multi-methodology project staff. Your people are using the methodology that makes sense. As a PMO, you are looking at that project when it comes in, and you begin your discussions as it starts into your pipeline on which methodology should we be doing. If it has a lot of mainline constraints, it's main time regulatory, maybe it does need to be 100% waterfall. However, if there are a lot of decisions that haven't been made and a lot of flexibility that's still needed, maybe it does need to be more agile. Or it's going to be hybrid someplace in the middle, using some of what you already have in your culture along with a lot of those Agile and Scrum principles. That's what we're seeing happen in so many organizations. So here's some of the principles for adjusting a tool. Which tool aligns with the current project mix? Which tool supports the future of the organization? What is the approval system for selections of the project? Are they all needed? What kind of meetings need to be synchronous and compared to asynchronous? Now, when we talk about synchronous and asynchronous, this is a very common tool with verbiage for online education. Synchronous just means what we're doing right now, same time. You're seeing me in live time. Asynchronous is what's going to happen after this video goes out. People can watch the video at any time of the day. Asynchronous. So you're flexible. The truth is there's a place for both of these in project management today. If you're having remote teams, they're probably looking at a lot of stuff asynchronous. If you're having meetings and you're wanting live meetings, then it's going to be synchronous as you start going through them. Principles of adjusting communication, over communication and information overload. Sometimes we have done this. Many times we don't have enough, but sometimes we have done this. Excessive detail can obscure core objectives. Stakeholders may miss action items due to sheer volume of information they're being expected to read or watch. And important messages are buried beneath less critical updates. We've got so much stuff we're telling people that the most important is getting covered over. It's becoming gray, and they're missing some of those most important points. So we've got to come up with a way to be able to communicate the most important. Not that some of the other stuff is not coming along to update people. Of course it is. But we've got to be able to distinguish that these are the most important, and these are going to be the updates that we have to stay with for our industry or company. Also, top-down messaging suppresses grassroots feedback or innovation from execution teams, fosters a command and control environment, demotivates stakeholders who feel voiceless. All of that has to adjust. If we're expecting our teams to be able to make decisions and get the projects out the door faster, then we've got to be able to have a much more open communication, a much more transparent type of communication with all the people that are going to be involved there. Also, inconsistent or contradictory messaging. In other words, we're hearing two different things as we're trying to make decisions for the projects that we're working on. Different versions of information on different platforms, conflicting directives from various leaders, confused team members. So you've got one group of leadership that's saying one thing, and you've got somebody who disagrees with them and they're saying something else. And so you're hearing the positive, here's where we're going, you're hearing the negative over here. Yeah, that's not going to happen. That's happening with AI right now. So artificial intelligence, you've got leaders who are saying, man, this is going to open up a lot of opportunities for us. And you've got the naysayers who are saying it's not going to do anything. And the truth is there's truth in both of those, but that confuses your project teams when they're trying to move the project forward. So different versions of it undermine the trust in the communication strategy and leadership. You're not wanting to do that. Talk about the issues, but we're not trying to undermine the organization or the direction they're going. Improving project outcomes through tailored risk management. So risk management is another area that you might want to look at. So it addresses the right risk for the right project. So being in a company some time ago, and they were addressing, almost 100 risks, and maybe that's not very many for your projects. I thought it was a lot for theirs, and they felt like they had to do this big, monstrous risk analysis for every risk. You do need that for some risk, no doubt about it. There are some risks that you want to do a good analysis of. Typically, though, on many projects, you might be 10 to 15 in many of your projects that you're doing that on. Some of you maybe that's not enough for some of the extreme projects that you're working on. But what you're wanting to do is not spend a lot of time on a risk that really is not of that caliber. You're going to be able to come up with your mitigation and contingency strategies for those top knock your socks off kind of risk. And then some of those you are going to deal with on the fly and workarounds, because you're not going to have a mitigation strategy for 100% of your risk every time. It doesn't seem to work like that for most of us. Now, maybe your projects are different. And so maybe what I'm saying you totally disagree with. I get it. So maybe yours are different. But typically that's not the case. So not every project faces the same level of risk. And it doesn't face the same level of risk all the way through the project. Very risky in the beginning, not much in the middle, not much at the end. Very risky at the end, not much in the middle or at the beginning. So mitigation and contingency strategies will have to shift. So a high-risk government infrastructure project may require strict compliance, whereas a low-risk internal IT upgrade may only need light governance and not have very much risk at all, because you've done this multiple times as you've come through. So you're looking at this when we're talking about some of this. The project tailoring risk, adjusting the approach, and also the project moves along in a faster way. So what risks do we really need to be looking at and coming up with contingency and mitigation? Do we really need it for everything? And so we're just having to think differently because of time and because of resources. You don't have enough people. Your skeleton crew trying to do all the projects that you're trying to do. So you're trying to do the most important thing at all times. So tailoring risk, projects evolve, new risks emerge over time. We all have experienced that. And so tailoring encourages continuous adjustment of methodology as risks change. Also, this dynamic approach ensures processes evolve with the project and not against it. So you might have adjusted your process and you think it feels good, and then get in the middle of something and you start realizing, wow, we've got to make another adjustment because of new information, new data, a new requirement that has come in that we didn't know about when we started. That's okay. That's welcome to the world of project management. We're hitting a moving target, even when we don't think we are. Sometimes we're doing that. So too little process, too much process. We're dealing with both of those. So you're looking at tailoring the process and having just enough. So what does that mean for risk? Well, we have chaos if we don't do enough. What you're shooting for is that balance of risk management, that we have enough structure there and enough of a balance of a risk plan and contingency and mitigation that we're going to be able to handle that risk. And that's what you're shooting for. And if you have that feeling that some of your risk is either non-existent or it is on the other side, it's overkill, then you know what I'm talking about. There's got to be that balance as you're dealing with some of those. You're always going to put out fires. You're always going to have something you don't know about your project. That's the world we live in with project management. There can always be that hiccup that we have on a project because we get in and find out that something wasn't what we thought it was. That's even with good analysis, that happens at times. So let's look at adapting project governance to suit project complexity. So a definition of project complexity. It's a degree of difficulty in planning, executing, and managing a project caused by the number of interrelated factors, uncertainties, and stakeholders dynamics that influence outcomes. It is not just about project size. It is about how uncertain, interconnected, and dynamic the project environment is. So in other words, what you're looking at is, if you're doing a project within one agency or one department, much easier than you're doing an enterprise-wide project because you've got multiple stakeholders, multiple viewpoints, and multiple demands for your objectives. So that's what we're talking about here with that complexity. And so if I'm doing something within a department, is it possible that we can streamline that thing and get that thing in pretty easy? But if I'm doing it across the organization, of course, we're going to have to dot every I and cross every T because we've got all kinds of different rules for every one of these groups or agencies or departments. It's different compared to a single department project that we're doing. So we are having to do a balancing act a little bit different on both of those. When we look at project governance is a framework of rules, processes, roles, responsibilities that guide the project, decision-making, accountability, and oversight. It ensures that projects align with organizational strategy. They use resources effectively, manage risk, deliver intended value. It is the system of authority and control that dictates how a project is directed and managed. For those of you who have a PMO or an EPMO, you're coming at it from, they've given some structure there that they feel comfortable with. And so as we're talking about this is good for anybody in a PMO to hear, because that tailoring is not going to go away. It's something that's being driven, like I said, not just because of new writings from PMI. They've always wanted us to tailor it, but now that they're driving it with certification, the PMP, this is going to be something that's going to come up more and more. So when we look at governance, how much governance do we need? Once again, for that classification of a project. If our governance is one size fits all, then this is exactly what it's chipping away at. But if our governance is we've got multiple levels of projects and governance and rigor is associated with that, then that's going to give us some flexibility on our project. So just something for you to consider as part of your talking points down the road. All right, so are there any negatives to tailoring? There would be. So let's take a look at this. Sorry about that. So negatives to tailoring. So risk of under tailoring or over tailoring, we know we've got that capability there. Knowledge gaps and misapplication, we'll go deeper in all of these. Inconsistency across projects, resistance from employees to using a flexible methodology. All of these are some negatives that you would have to deal with. People are going to be resistant because they want sometimes a one size fits all. Sometimes you'll find management that wants one size fits all, and that's fine. But we're kind of talking out of both sides of our mouth. I want speed and flexibility, but I want one size fits all, and that's not typically going to be that easy. Is there inconsistency across projects? There is. There's inconsistency as far as the rigor, but there's not an inconsistency as far as project management. You are running that project using project management principles and project management tools, but the rigor is what is inconsistent. So don't make it sound like you're not running the project using project management methodology. Of course you are. So let's break it down a little bit and see if we can help kind of give some light to this. So the negatives. So risk of under tailoring, over tailoring, knowledge gaps, inconsistency, resistance from the employees. So risk of under tailoring or over tailoring. So under tailoring, leaving too much process in places slows down delivery and adds bureaucracy. So we left too much bureaucracy in. So we left too many sign-offs. We left too much. The risk evaluation was too stringent. So all of that is a learning process too, based on the level of project. And so all of us will find those kind of components. And so you'll have to run several projects using a flexible methodology of how much rigor for each of these. And then over time, you'll start coming up with the pattern, and the PMO will start coming up with recommendations for that. Over tailoring, stripping out too much rigor creates a risk of missed requirements, poor documentation, audit failures. If you start having a lot of those and you think, you know what, we probably need a little more rigor in these areas. And that's what it's going to do. It's going to allow you to pinpoint what some of those are going to be and be more spot on in where that rigor is going to help and where it has made no difference. When we talk about solutions, under tailoring or over tailoring, so you're establishing tailoring guidelines that would come from management or that would come from your team. And so establishing tailoring guidelines, creating organizational policies, establishing a decision matrix based on the type and level of the project. Use risk-based tailoring, connect the tailoring decision to project size, complexity. Conduct period reviews, create and assign governance boards and PMOs to evaluate tailoring choice. Now, you might not have all this structure, or you might have every bit of it right now. The point is that you're trying to look at every project as an individual and look at what that project needs for success. You're not looking at it from the aspect of conformity. You're looking at it from the aspect of success. What can we do that's going to still bring that level of value, but we're doing the least we can, the least we have to do. We're still meeting those quality standards. So let's move into the knowledge gap a little bit. So knowledge gaps and misapplication. So tailoring requires skill and judgment. Poorly trained project managers may not know which processes are safe to remove or scale down, and it leads to a misalignment between methodology and project needs. So let's start with the last one first. You are still using project management methodology, but you are becoming more current in your thought process. Your thought process is the right amount of methodology for that project. That's what you're trying to do. And so that's really the new wave of people thinking about project management. What's the right amount of methodology for that process? Right amount of methodology for that project. And so tailoring allows you to be able to do that. So as you train your people and as you verbalize this within your organization, the culture shifts to where you start realizing that people start verbalizing the same thing. It starts making sense to you. And those of you who are on here, that it makes sense to you right now. What's the right amount of methodology for that project? Some of this is way too much for what we're trying to do. And so you're training, you're educating, you're coaching, you're taking some of that tacit knowledge that you have from your experience of doing this, and over time you will build that in. And even the training you do where you're actually setting people down, allow that to be one of the components. If you're doing brown bag lunches with your people, talk about shifting that methodology. What's the right amount of methodology? Now, the truth is, in every audit, in every lessons learned, you're going to evaluate that. Did we have enough rigor or not enough rigor? And all of that is fair game to talk about. So, solutions for knowledge gap and misapplication. The first is obviously going to be training. Training, you can do this internally. And of course, with artificial intelligence, this is going to be an additional tool that you're going to be able to use for some of this training, because you're going to be able to plug in artificial intelligence to help you build some of these discussion points with your people. So, provide targeted training on tailoring principles that support the organization's context. Tailoring playbooks, so you develop checklists, templates, real scenarios that guide project managers on how to guide the process. AI right now, if you build the right prompt, AI will actually write a scenario for you on something like this and allow you to engage with your people at a brown bag lunch that you're doing, and you're controlling the cost of every bit of it. And you can talk about how to be able to adjust that rigor for some of your projects if you're wanting to do this. You don't even need a trainer for any of this, and be able to structure this. And then mentorship programs pair less experienced managers with those who have more experience, and especially those who buy into that we adjust the methodologies and adjust the rigor so that we can get the projects out the door faster. So, our inconsistency across projects. Many times people will talk about this because inconsistency has been an important piece. We want to do everything the same way. And I understand that. I lean that way myself as well sometimes. The problem is that in project management, it just doesn't work. It's not working as well as what we want to think it does. If all we're doing is running building projects and doing it the same way, that makes sense. We're building a house, and then we build another house down the road. We're building another house down the road. Okay, I get it. But many of you are not working on the exact same project. You're working on a blend of projects. And that's why this is needing to be talked about, because that blend is why you're having to make your adjustment, because what you're doing, the outgoal is going to be something that's different. And so that's why you're needing to adjust it. So erosion of organizational standards can happen. So this turns into the wild, wild west. And this is what sometimes people will say. We need standardization so that this doesn't happen. So this turns into a wild west effect, where projects diverge so much that organizational identity and reliability and project execution are lost. The organization can look inconsistent or unprofessional. All of that could be true. All of that could be true. But here's the thing, you're not wanting it to get to this point. You're not going to take it to this point, because this is chaos. So don't take it to chaos, but you're going to adjust it to where, once again, you're hitting that target. And then if that's not enough, you're able to adjust it a little bit more. And then other solutions for inconsistency across projects: centralized tailoring framework. So developing a consistent organizational approach for project specifics. And there will be some specifics that, regardless of what project. For an example, some of you might still have your business case, your feasibility study, and your charter, regardless of what type of project you have, because that's the way your culture works. And so that charter is going to give you the budget. That charter is going to give you a project manager or the team. And then from that point on, it might be different. So that first part of the project and getting it into the pipeline might not change. But from planning on, that's what typically we're looking at, that adjusting some of that. Governance oversight, ensuring the PMO or the steering committee review tailoring decisions for consistency and alignment with organizational strategies. Also, you're looking at knowledge sharing, encouraging project teams to document decisions. So once again, you're looking at how can we create best practices from tailoring our projects and tailoring our methodologies. That's what you're going to do. And your best practices might be different than what we would do with our projects, because of the type of project you're running. Resistance to using a flexible methodology. There are, and probably some of you listening might be resistant. I get it. And if it doesn't work for you, then you know what? Don't use it. Don't use it. So spit it out as bones in a fish, okay? And just throw it away. But it is something that we're going to have to consider. So teams and stakeholders accustomed to standard methodologies may resist this, especially without clear communication and training. And your environment might not be open to something like this, and you have to run your projects your way. But eventually, we're going to have to talk about some of these in some of our types of projects. So without proactive communication, stakeholder engagement, targeted training efforts, such resistance can impede the successful implementation of customized processes. And so as your projects shift, and they do shift, as you already know, the projects you're doing today are different than they were 10 years ago. And so that makes a difference on what and how you're going to be running that project. And so as we talk about some of these things, these are some things for you to consider down the road here. A resistance to using the flexible model: communicate value clearly, show how tailoring increases efficiency and reduces waste, Stakeholder involvement, involve resistant stakeholders early in the tailoring discussion, because that will help them to be able to not only be educated in the tailoring and what you're saying. A lot of times we get misquoted. And so people will say something that we didn't say. Well, they're trying to get rid of all the methodology, and that's not true. You're not trying to get rid of all the methodology, but you're trying to streamline it to where we use just enough methodology. A pilot project is a great way of being able to test some of this out. So you run small, low-risk pilot initiatives using the new approach and allow people to be able to be part of this. And so that allows you to be able to take that as your training center and educational center, and then use what you've learned from that to be able to roll it out. And then last piece here would be change management support. Provide workshops, increase communication as you do this. Many of you, as you start rolling out AI, if you're not already rolling it out right now, you're going to have to look at some of these things, because we are having to ask questions we've never asked before about a project. And so we're having to look at how to be able to use a great technology in the safest way possible for our organization. And so if we're not using it, then what's that going to do for our particular industry and those opportunities that could have come our way? But at the same time, we've got to do it in the safest manner possible. Now, let me close out with a couple of things here. And so let me thank you for listening to that portion of it. So future webinars. So next month, we're going to talk about empowerment, shifting authority and responsibility to the project team. So today, when we talked about tailoring, part of tailoring it, once again, is allowing your team to make as many decisions as possible. Next month, we're going to reinforce that, because we're going to talk about shifting some of that, not all of it, but shifting some of that over to the teams. And then in December, we'll close out this year with data-driven decision-making and project management, leveraging metrics for success. And you'll be getting an email from Kim soon. We have already set our schedule for brand new webinars in 2026. Can you believe it? I can't believe it's there. You're going to have to buy Christmas presents before long. So it's just around the corner. So 2026 is just around the corner. You'll start seeing on our website where you can sign up for those. And so we've already gotten some new topics, new emphasis for 2026, and that'll be coming out. And so that'll be good for you. We have one more boot camp this year. And so this is we'll close out our 2025 virtual PMP exam prep boot camp, December 8th through 11. And so we will be doing that. That will be our last group for 2025. And of course, for those of you who have people who are needing a little bit of coaching before they get to the boot camp, we will roll out, I think, 3 or 4 free mastermind groups next year. And so your people can sign up, and it helps them kind of fill out their application, start understanding what the PMP is going to entail. And so all of that's free. It's run for a 5-day period of time, but it's probably about 30 minutes a day for 5 days is what it is for them to kind of hear about the PMP, understand how the PMP is working, and then they also get a discount for coming to the boot camp if they choose to come at that point. And we also give a free scholarship to somebody that's in the mastermind group. So be looking for that for some of your people who are going to be involved with this. And if you need additional help or any kind of questions or anything, you can call or you can send an email or come to our website. I'd love to talk with you. I'd love to give you some more feedback. If you've got questions about something, been communicating back and forth with folks about artificial intelligence and some of these types of things, and that's been kind of fun. So anyway, let me bring this to a close today. We're right down to the wire. Thank you so much every webinar that you attend. I appreciate it so much, and I hope it's always bringing value. And those of you who, if you disagree with some of the things I always say, please understand my heart. My heart is to just get us some talking points on some of these things and just considering it. And so tailoring is going to be one of those talking points, okay? And so if it doesn't work for you, then it doesn't work. But God bless you for being here and listening to what I was sharing with you this morning. I hope you have a wonderful holiday season as we get ready to move into some of those special days, okay? God bless you guys. Thank y'all so much for being here this morning, and y'all take care and have a great weekend. Bye, y'all.